We're on Kuf Ayin Ches here in Harerei Kedem. We started Harerei Kedem last week. I just wanted to finish that up. And we said the following. You remember the Mishnah had established Maschil B'Gnus and Masayim B'Shvach. And we said the following, that we have what's called a Chovas Hodah, so that a person has to praise and appreciate Hashem. And apparently the fulfillment of that praise is by starting with Gnus. We start with, whether it's Avodim Hayinu according to Shmuel, or Mitchila Ovdei Avodah Zarah Mitzrayim according to Rav. And the source for this mitzvah in the Torah of Shevach HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Hodaya is Mikra Bikurim. When a person brings his first fruits to the Beis HaMikdash, he reads an entire parsha. That parsha begins with Arami Oved Avi in Parshas Ki Sava. And he's thanking Hashem for the entire history that led to the point in which he now has grown his fruits, and he can take them and offer them, the first ones, to the Beis HaMikdash. And even in the case of Hodaya, with regard to Mikra Bikurim, we start with Gnus, of Arami Oved Avi. And Arami is a reference, let's say, to Lavan. There may be other interpretations. And he's called Avi. I mean, he's the father of Rachel and Leah, and therefore he's our grandfather. And Oved, he was out to destroy us. Now, it could be the word Avi here refers to Yaakov Avinu. So Arami, which would be our grandfather, tried to kill Yaakov and destroy it. And that's called, of course, Maschil B'Gnus. So we're going to follow that seder, that sequence of Maschil B'Gnus and Masayim B'Shvach that applies in Mikra Bikurim, and we're going to clone it, so to speak, on to the night of the Pesach, the night of the Seder, the Chovas Hodah, to thank Hashem. And you may recall that the Gemara here on Daf Kuf Tes Zayin Amud Aleph had told a story about Rav Nachman's Eved Daru, in which Rav Nachman asked his Eved, what would you say to your master if he set you free? And he said, Bo la duye l'shabuche. He would have to be modeh and be mishabech, the Adon. So the Haggadah, according to Rav Soloveitchik, is not just a sipur, it's not just telling the story, but it's a sipur of Hodah. So the ultimate goal of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim is to express our thanksgiving. And we'll see this at the climax of the Haggadah, which is Lefichach Anu Chayavim Lahodos. And that's here in the Mishnah on Gaf Kuf Tes Zayin Amud Beis, which we didn't get to yet. So Anu Chayavim Lahodos is the way the Baal Haggadah expresses our main critical obligation, Lahodos. So therefore, we're going to try to figure out how to fulfill this mitzvah of Lahodos, and we're going to borrow it from the paradigmic Hodah of Mikra Bikurim, where we begin with Gnus and we go on to Shvach. And Rav Soloveitchik wants to find a parallel in a Mishnah at the end of Masechet Sukkah with regard to Simchas Beis HaShoeva. And the Mishnah says, Higil l'shara yotzim mimizrach, hafchu pneihem mimizrach l'marav. So when they left the holy part of what's called the Shara Mizrach, they turned to the Marav, to the west. The Shechina is always in the west. And they recited the following recitation: Avosenu shahayu b'makom hazeh, when our forefathers came to this holy place, to the Beis Hamikdash, achoreim el ha'heichal upneim kadma l'shemesh. And we are going to imitate our forefathers, anu liyah einenu liyah. So here's the Hodah that they recited on Sukkot at the Simchas Beis HaShoeva during the period of Bayis Sheni. And once again, Hosku Bignus. Why? Because our forefathers turned our backs against the Heichal, which was obviously an insult to the holy, to the Shekhinah. Now, what about the machlokas between Rav and Shmuel? He says the following. The main point of this machlokas with regard to the Chiyuv Hodah, how to fulfill Hodah and Leila Pesach, we say Hallelu Avdei Hashem. We will praise Hashem because we are servants of Hashem. We are not Avdei Paro. Okay, that's in a general sense what we want to say to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that he took us out of Avdus LeFaro and he granted us freedom to become Avdei Hashem. But now the question is, what is the main critical part of Hodah? The first possibility is that Hodah, our thanks, is on Geula Seinu. Now the word Geula, it's interesting. A lot of people are unaware of this. They think that Geula refers to a spiritual redemption, but that's not so. Because we find the word Geula in the context of stei achuza. And the Torah says, in Parshas Bahar, with regard to stei achuza, that you could redeem the sada and get it back after you sold it within a 12-month period of time. And that's called Geulas Bayis Hamukefes Choma. So you have an achuza, you have a piece of very expensive real estate that you inherited through the generations. And that stei achuza was sold. And the Torah says you could be goel that soda, which means you could redeem it and get it back by giving back the money that you received in payment. So Rav Soloveitchik calls that geula gashmis, right? We're talking about a geula in a physical or monetary sense, juridically. You went from slavery to freedom. You were a liberated slave. That's Shmuel. Shmuel says we'll begin Maskal B'Gnus with Avodim Ayinu L'Far B'Mitzrayim, with the Avdus. And that's Hodah and Geula, because V'otzeinu Hashem Misham, and God took us out and liberated us. We're no longer Avodim. That's Maskal B'Gnus, U'Mesayim B'Shvach, on our Geula, Hodah and our Geula, according to Shmuel. And therefore, we begin with Shibud Aguf, with the fact that we were physically enslaved. Now we move on to Rav. We say at the end of Magid, Al Gulasenu, Al Pidus Nafshenu. Pidus Nafshenu already is a different concept. The word Pidia refers to Hegdish. For example, if you are Magdish something, then assuming it's Lebedek Habayis, as Kedushas Dam, you could be Poda it. So the word Pidyon refers to Hegdish. And within the context of Pidyon, we have what's called Pidus HaNefesh. The Nefesh of a person, his, shall we say, spiritual being is his essence. And that's the Nefesh. And Pidus HaNefesh means that whereas Avodah Zarah is the opposite, is antithetical to Pidus HaNefesh, and therefore that's called maskil bignus. Then Messiah b'shvach is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu now kirvono amokom lavodaso, that we should serve not avodas zara but rather avodas Hashem, and that's Rav Shita, that the main critical element in Hodah, on this night we're obligated to thank Hashem for Pedus HaNefesh. So we have the Shmuel putting the emphasis on the physical redemption and Rav on the spiritual redemption. Because man is a dual being. He's made up of Guf and Nefesh. Now, the Baal Haggadah brings down in the Haggadah many of the critical halachos of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. For example, Kol Amar B'Lesaper Reis HaMeshubach, or for example, Lefi Daito Shel Ben Aviv Melamdo. These are all basic halachos in the context of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. Keneged Arba Bonim Dibra Torah. What's the ultimate purpose of mentioning these four categories? It's Chanoch Lenar Al Pi Darko, or as the Rambam calls it, Lefi Daito Shel Ben Aviv Melamdo. That's what Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim is all about. There's another halacha in Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. Chayav Adam Liras Es Atzmo. That's what we're up to in the Mishnah. We haven't gotten to it yet, but that's the last point that we got to. Or Rab Gamliel, Kol Shalom Shlosh Dvar Malol. All these halachos are integrated into the very fabric of the Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim of the Haggadah Shel Pesach. Not only that, we introduced Ben Zoma that we're chayav in Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim, both by day and by night, twice daily. That is a broadening of Hilchos Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim to include the entire year. However, the halacha of Maskil Bignus U'Mesayim B'Shvach is not mentioned in the Haggadah, and yet it seems to define the very essence of Chayav Adam Lahodos Lefi Chachanu Chayom Lahodos Lahalel. Why did they decide to omit Maskil Bignus U'Mesayim B'Shvach? But the answer is, this halacha of Maskil Bignus U'Mesayim B'Shvach is a borrowed halacha. It doesn't originate in Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. All the halachas that we mentioned in Haggadah regarding Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim are anchored exclusively in Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. Maskil Bignus U'Mesayim B'Shvach is halacha in Mikra Bikurim, which is now being transplanted or cloned onto Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. It doesn't belong in the membership club of all the enumerated halachos in the Haggadah that are unique and exclusive to Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. The root of the Chiyuv Hodah of Maskil Bignus U'Mesayim B'Shvach is where? In Mikra Bikurim. Do we have that? Shake your head if you're following me. Okay, good. So that's the real source of Maskil Bignus U'Mesayim B'Shvach. We're only borrowing it, so to speak, and applying it here to Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, but the real halach of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim is Liros Asatzmo Kiluhu Yotzav Mitzrayim, to thank Hashem because he sees himself as if he personally left Mitzrayim. Brilliant observation and a chiddush here. Who would have even realized and been sensitive to the whole list of halachos regarding Sipur that are incorporated into the Haggadah? And then who would have realized that the most fundamental and essential halacha in Sipur was omitted from this list of halachas? And who would have realized that that essential halacha is really borrowed from elsewhere and is rooted in the mitzvah of Mikra Bikurim? Very, very brilliant. Now, when you read the Gemara of Rav and Shmuel that we've been studying, you get the impression that Rav rejected Shmuel. And Shmuel's proposition that we should start with Avodah Mayinu as an expression of Maschil B'Knus was rejected by Rav. The Rav says, Dover said, Tomua Tuva. I mean, is Rav completely rejecting Avodah Mayinu? Avodah Mayinu is the essence of what we're talking about on this night of Pesach. Yitzias Mitzrayim means that we got out of Avdus. So how could Rav possibly reject Shmuel, Avodah Mayinu? He says the following. Rav is not telling us that if you start with Avodah Mayinu Lefarav Mitzrayim, as Shmuel would advocate, you forfeit the mitzvah of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim. Surely, Rav can't reject Avodah Mayinu. In fact, you may recall, I'm just adding a footnote here as we go by, that the Ritva is of the opinion that the Machlokas is where should we start? But they both agree that we should have, we went back to the chronology, and Rav thought that chronologically we should start with Avodah Mayinu. So Rav Soloveitchik says the following, and I underlined this in my edition. Gam Rav lo polig al Shmuel beikar chovas hasipur. Rav confesses that, or concedes, maybe I should say, that Shmuel is right, that the main critical central point in Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim is not Avodah Zarah. We're talking about Avdus. And not only that, the answer to the questions of the Ben about what's unique about this night, whether it's the matzah and the morah and so forth, it's all about Avodah Mayinu. The fact that we were avodah. And that's going to explain all the changes and the unusual behavior on this night of the Seder. Why do we eat Pesach, and why do we eat matzah, why do we eat morah? It's all about Avodah Mayinu. And Rav cannot deny that. We're moving on here to page Kufay and Tes. Zochar es ayom hazeh, the Torah says, asher yatzasem miMitzrayim. Remember the day of Yetziat Mitzrayim. And that's going to be the answer to all the questions of the Manishtana, that we were avodim and then we were freed from Avdus. Rav holds that although the mitzvah of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim per se, no doubt, as Shmuel's correct, is all about Avodah Mayinu, but we have another chiyuv on this night as a branch, so to speak, of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim, and that's Hodah. And Rav therefore holds that in the context of Hodah, we have Pidus Nafshenu, and therefore we begin with the fact that we were Ovdei Avodah Zarah. He says, the Rav's Sfila the Ikar Hodah Shel Halu Avdei Hashem V'lo Avdei Paruhu Al Sha'achshav Kirvanu HaMokum LaAvodasal. Let's leave the legal freedom and liberation from legal slavery on the side, and when we're talking about Hodah, let's talk about the purpose of freedom from slavery. God liberated us from slavery for a purpose, and what was that purpose? The purpose is Achshav Kervanu HaMokum LaAvodasal, that now we should be Ovdei Hashem. Worship one God, not many gods, but one God. And therefore the pasuk says, "B'tzeiska Mitzrayim tavdu nesash Elokim ala harazeh." This is what Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu in their first encounter at the Sneh, the ultimate goal of Yetzias Mitzrayim is Tavdun es Hashem Elokeichem al Har Hazeh. You'll serve God on this mountain where you'll receive the Torah. So therefore, according to this twist, so to speak, a new perspective on the Machlokas Rav and Shmuel, they're not arguing about Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. And Rav would have to concede to Rav that Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, the Exodus, is about the liberation from slavery. Avodim Hayinu Elfar Mitzrayim. Rav's point is that although it's absolutely necessary and required to speak about Avodim Hayinu Elfar Mitzrayim, but that's not sufficient. Because Avodim Hayinu Elfar Mitzrayim only indicates the legalistic freedom and liberation from slavery. We're no longer Avdei Paro. But that's not the main point of our Hodah. We're thanking Hashem for Avdus. Avdus means that now Hashem made us into His Avodim, His capital H, as opposed to Avodim to Zara, to Avodah Zara. And therefore, Dilarav Ba'miras Avodim Lo Yatsi Yedei Chovasam. Because the ultimate goal is not just liberation from slavery, that we're no longer Avodim, but rather that we are now Avdei Hashem. And therefore, we need not just the discussion in Maskil Bignus of the Shibud HaGuf, of the physical slavery, we also need to mention the Shibud HaNefesh. Because according to Shmuel, Maskil Bignus only refers to Gnus Gashmis, to Shibud HaGuf. That's the Chiyuv Hodah of Leil HaPesach. The Rambam writes, Ketzad Maskil Misaper Shebetchila Hoyu Avoseinu B'mei Terach and Rodfim Achar Avodah Zorah. The Rambam describes how back in the days of our ancestors, going back to Terach Avri Avram, we were Rodfim Achar Avodah Zorah. And that's the Rambam's opening line on Maskil Bignus. And then V'chein, and in addition, the Rambam writes, Maskil Avodim Hayinu. But that doesn't reflect the way we have it in Agada. In our Agada, we started with Avodim Hayinu, and then we went to the Arba Bonim, and the answer to the question of Arba Bonim was Mitchila of the Avodah Zarah, and we switched it around. Not only that, the Rambam at the end of Hilchas Chametz U'Matzah writes his Nusach of Haggadah, and his Nusach Haggadah is identical with ours in that sequence. And instead of beginning with Mitchila of the Avodah Zarah Hayu Avoseidu, we begin with Avodim Hayinu. And furthermore, the Rambam says V'chein Maskil U'Modiah Shavodim Hayinu. And then the Rambam writes V'hu sheYidrosh me'Arami Ovid Ovi Ad sheYigma Kol Parsha Kula. What is the drash of Parshas Oved Arami Ovid Ovi have to do with Maskil Bignus? The connection is not clear. So Rav Soloveitchik says the following, that Shmuel holds Maskil Bignus Avodim Hayinu. It doesn't mean the words Avodim Hayinu. He means that the Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim should be fulfilled through the drasha, through the analysis and interpretation of the Parsha of Arami Ovid Ovi. And this Parsha of Arami Ovid Ovi, which is Mikra Bikurim, is itself a kiyum of Maskil Bignus U'Mesayim B'Shvach. So therefore Shmuel holds that we should be Maskil Bignus U'Mesayim B'Shvach through the drasha of this Parsha. And therefore, the Rambam is going to start with Ovdei Avodah Zarah, like we saw Ketzad Maskil Misaper Tchila Hayu Avoseinu B'mei Terach Rod from Achar Avodah Zarah, and that's going to come before Avodim Hayinu v'chein maskal avodim Hayinu. That comes later. And in the Nusach Haggadah, we have Mitchila Ovdei Avodah Zarah before the drash of Harami Ovid Ovi. And that really is a fulfillment of the Rambam's dictum that we should start with Mitchila Hayu Ovdei Avodah Zarah. The Guf Amiras Avodim Hayinu Shakol Omer B'Tchila Sagara Zel Kuliyam Din B'Fnei Atzma Sharei Zeu Ikra Tshuva L'Sheil Sabonin. So again, we have these two dimensions. We have the what he calls the Ikra Tshuva, the answer to the Bonim, and that's Avodim Hayinu L'Far Mitzrayim, which explains all the mitzvahs of the Laila. We have another dimension of the Chiv Hodah, which is derived from and duplicates Mikra Bikurim, and that's the drasha on the parsha of Harami Ovid Avi, and that's going to be the kiyum of Maschil Bignus U'Mesayim B'Shvach. Now, Rabbosai, we go to Simon Peches, which is our mission that we've been studying. Rab Gamliel Haya Omer Kol Shelo Omer Shol Shedvar Malalu Lo Yatzi Dechovas Eleim Pesach Vatzumar. What mitzvah are we talking about? He has not fulfilled his mitzvah if he didn't recite these three explanations. So if we look in the Rambam, Perek Zayin Halacha Hey, Kol Mi Shelo Omar Shlosh Dvarim Elu B'Leil Chamesh Lo Yatzi Dechovasa U'Dvarim Elu Kulam Nikraim Haggadah. So the Rambam understands that we're talking about the mitzvah of Amiras Haggadah. So if you did not include Shlosha Dvarim Elu, you did not fulfill the mitzvah of Haggadah, the mitzvah of Sipri Tzis Mitzrayim. And let's just remember that this was the shita of, just 1 second. This is in footnote number Aleph here on Kuf Tezayin Amud Beis. The shita of the Rash Beitz. I've forgotten. So the Rambam belongs to the school of the Rash Beitz. I mean, again, he's before the Rash Beitz, but I'm saying to that school of thought. And these three recitations of Rav Gamliel are critical for the mitzvah of Sipri Tzis Mitzrayim. However, now he quotes the Ramban in Milchamas Hashem, which is quoted here in this note Aleph. Now, what is the subject of this Ramban? The Ramban is not in Masechet Pesachim, but rather it's in Masechet Brachos. And the Ramban is doing an analysis of the language of the Mishnah in many, many places, where the Mishnah says, Lo yatsa yidei chovasa, those 4 words, Lo yatsa yidei chovasa. And the Ramban claims, which is a bit of a chiddush, that Lo yatsa yidei chovasa means chovaso kihilchasa. He didn't do it in the proper way, in the perfect, ideal way. However, he did fulfill his basic mitzvah. Like, for example, in Kriyas Mashal Arvis, let's say he recited Kriyas Shema after midnight. Lo yatzi de chovasa would mean that he didn't fulfill it in the proper way, but he still could fulfill the mitzvah Kriyas Shema up until daybreak. Now, the Ramban wants to give an example of this interpretation of Yotzi Lechovasi from our Mishnah. Of Kol Shlosh Omar Shlosha Dvarim Elu Pesach Lo Yotzi Lechovasi. Says the Ramban, V'lo sheyehei tzarich, is what we have to underline. V'lo sheyehei tzarich lachzor v'lechol Pesach Matzu Umor. Rav Gamliel doesn't mean that if he ate the Pesach, the matzah, and the maror without these recitations, he got to eat them again. That's not what he means. But which mitzvah is the Ramban focusing his attention on? Can anybody answer that? Do you hear me? So again, the Ramban says he doesn't have to eat the Pesach matzah and the maror a second time, even if he omitted Rabbi Gamliel's 3 statements. What mitzvah is the Ramban talking about?
So then it's Sipur. If you don't have to.
Again, if I tell you that you ate the matzah, you don't have to eat it a second time. What mitzvah am I talking about?
Oh, the Achila.
The Achila of matzah. Same thing with Pesach and Maror. That's what he writes over here. The Olam Mitoch Divrei Ramban, what we see from the Ramban is the Amiras Gimel Dvarim Elohim Chelet Mi Mitzvahs Pesach Matzah Maror. Or, as you point out, Steve, correctly, add the word Achila. Achila is Pesach Matzah Maror. He's not talking about the mitzvah of Sipur Yitzis Mitzrayim. He's not even mentioning the mitzvah of Sipur Yitzis Mitzrayim. He's only asking, if I omitted these statements, do I have to repeat my achil of matzah because I didn't fulfill my mitzvah of matzah? And he's answering, no, I fulfilled my mitzvah of matzah, but not the ideal way. The ideal way is to eat the matzah after I described the meaning of matzah. And now we can turn to page Kuf Pei. Vehine, the Ramban is the sheet of Tosfos. Where do you see this in Tosfos? So there's a Tosfos here, Dibra Maschel V'Amartem. I don't know where exactly this is. Oh, there it is. It was published off the daf mistakenly. It was printed on Kuf Tes Zayin Amud Aleph, Amartem. Pirish B'Amira Shetzarech Lomar Pesach Zeh Shanu Ochlin. So he's talking about the Achila of the Korban Pesach. And with regard to the Achila of the Korban Pesach, Tosfos says, you need the Amira. Amira means the statement that Pesach Zel Shumsha Pasach, etc. And Tosfos goes on to say, V'izkash Matzu Mar LePesach. So it means that the hekesh here between Pesach Matzu Morar that Tosfos is building his case on is with regard to the mitzvos of Pesach Matzu Morar. He's not defining Vamartem, which is the word for Pesach, as referring to Sipur Yitzis Mitzrayim, because then the hekesh to Matzah Morar really is very difficult. Now, Sarech Bir, at the end of the paragraph, Vehine, Ma'u Din Amira Zu. Not sure exactly what he means. Ma'u Din Amira Zu. I'm just going to take a shot at it. I think he's bothered by the fact that this Amira is part of the mitzvah of Pesach Matzah Umar. If it's part of Sipur, so Sipur is a mitzvah Amira, and now we enhance our Amira with the 3 statements of explaining the mitzvahs halayla. But if we're talking about the mitzvah of Achila, why is Amira part of the mitzvah of Achila? Amira and Achila are 2 separate mitzvahs. And yet the Ramban is saying, at least l'chatchila, the Achila should be preceded by the Amira. Okay. So now Rav Soloveitchik asks another question. The Gemara says in Rosh Hashanah that if they forced him at gunpoint to eat matzah, then he fulfills his mitzvah of matzah. Notice that he's not motivated by the obligation of eating matzah. They put a gun to his head. Now, according to Rabbi Gamliel, the way the Ramban understands it, then to fulfill your mitzvah of matzah, you have to say matzah zu al shumah, or at least l'chatchila. So if that be the case, in the case of kafu lechol matzah, where he certainly did not mention the purpose and the reasoning for matzah, he didn't fulfill his ideal mitzvah, according to the way the Ramban interprets it, but he did fulfill the mitzvah. And that was the Ramban's whole thesis, that lo yotzi dechovasa means he didn't do it the right way, but he certainly fulfilled his mitzvah. That's great. He says, but many Rishonim learn, not like the Ramban, that lo yotzi dechovaso means literally, kipshuto, he has not fulfilled his mitzvah. And without this Amira, he forfeits the mitzvah. But yet the Gemara says, kafu lechol matzah yotza, when they forced him, he was yotze. In other words, there's a whole school of Rishonim that understood that the subject of Rabbi Gamliel is Pesach Matzah Umar, those mitzvahs of Achila. And certainly amongst those Rishonim, there are those who took the Mishnah literally, that lo yotzi dechovaso means he forfeits the mitzvah. It's critical, it's indispensable. But what do we do to reconcile that with kafu lechol matzah? The Gemara Rosh Hashanah Chav Ches, which established that he's yotze even though he ate the matzah because he was coerced to do so. Where's the Amira from Gamliel, which is so critical? Now, I'm just guessing. We mentioned last time that according to this shita that Rabbi Gamliel is talking about the mitzvah of Achila, Pesach Matzah Umar, there are 2 dimensions to the mitzvah of Achila. One is the actual physical act of Achila, and the other is the Amira, the Amartem. And the subject of the Gemara, therefore, in Rosh Hashanah is the element of the physical achila. Let's see. V'nir levar da b'achilas Pesach Matzah Umar yeshnei kiyumim chalukim. Oh, okay, good. I think we're on the right track. Number one is kiyum shel mitzvahs achila. Okay, fine. And in addition, yesh kiyum nosaf shel sipur yetzias Mitzrayim. Now, this is not the way we said it. The mitzvah sipur yetzias Mitzrayim, sipur yetzias Mitzrayim atzmos kayemes b'shnei ofanim al yidei amiras hagodav hasipur, and ma'isa mitzvah shel sipur. So the sipur b'ma'isa, not just b'peh, and that's achilas Pesach matzah mor. Right, and drinking 4 kosos derech haseba is also a ma'isa of sipur yetzias Mitzrayim. Kiyum sipur Mitzrayim al yidei ma'isa. And this all fits into the halacha of chayav adam laharos es atzmo kilu hu yotza mitzrayim. We have another example through tibul, right? We take the matzah, according to the Rambam Shita, and the Mara according to everybody, and we dip it into charoses. So we're talking about zeichel etit. I mean, obviously in matzah we can't be talking about a health reason. There's no kappa. Okay, so now we get back to the Ramban. Ume'ata sover Ramban the chelek michiv sipur ze al yedei ma'aser hu gam din amiro. Anil meikra devamartem zevach pesach. Al yedei amira zu umegala es hasipur yetzias Mitzrayim shebe pesach matzah umor. If I understand correctly, and I say this with limited responsibility, limited liability, Rav Soloveitchik is now bringing the Ramban much, much closer to the understanding of the Rashbeitz of sipur yetzias Mitzrayim. And when the Ramban says, Lo yotza yidei chovas pesach matzah moror, he means the dimension of sipur that you fulfill through the achila of pesach matzah moror. I'm not a happy camper with this. I'm not on board with this. But that's what I think he's saying. So within the constellation of sipur yetzias Mitzrayim, you've got sipur b'peh through amira, and then you have sipur b'maisa through the achila of Pesach matzah mor. So I'm trying to figure out, where do we classify this? Is this part of Pesach matzah mor, or is this part of sipur yetzias Mitzrayim? The way the Rav is saying it here, al yidei amira zu hu megala es hasipur yetzias Mitzrayim shebe Pesach matzah mor. Ulahachi kol shelo omer shlosha dvarim elu yotzi dei chovas kiyum hasipur. So he's obligated to be mesaper b'tzis mitzrayim through the achila, and Rabbi Gamliel is telling me he can only do so with these amiros. So it comes out at the end of the day that lo yotzi de chovaso means lo yotzi de chovas sipri tzis mitzrayim, because the sipri mitzrayim requires, in addition to the amira, also the achila when we explain the achila. But he didn't bother explaining the achila. Excuse me. So when we go back to the Gemara Rosh Hashanah, where they forced him to eat the matzah, and he's yotzei the mitzvah matzah, that's fine. As far as the mitzvah of Sipur is concerned, he doesn't have the mitzvah of Sipur. He didn't recite the Aggadah. And for sure, he didn't integrate or upgrade his achila to an achila of Sipur Yitzis Mitzrayim. So as far as Sipur Yitzis Mitzrayim, he has zippo. He has nothing. He doesn't have Sipur, and he doesn't have the achila, which is the Sipur Alidei Maisa. He doesn't have the Sipur Beped, nor the Sipur Alidei Maisa. But he has fulfilled his mitzvah of matzah. Okay, so let's make a note of where we got up to here. I want to go on, in the Gemara itself. Now, I just want to mention just a technicality. Tomorrow we're trying an experiment. I don't know if it's, what I'm asking you is, let's not change everything in terms of our schedule. We'll just try this one experiment and see. We'll be smarter tomorrow and see if it works. So for tomorrow, what I'd like to do is we would learn Pesachim from 9 to 10, and then start Lulav HaGazel from 10 to 11. And then we go back to Sanhedrin at 11, or something along that line. You got to add 5-10 minutes here and there because, to separate one from the other. And I'm hoping that, as I was promised, they'll have Wi-Fi in that shul, which is on the other side of Efrat, in a neighborhood called Rimon. So that's going to be an experiment for tomorrow. Okay, then. We're here on Kuf Tes Zayin Amud Beis. And we're up to B'chol Dar V'Dar. So let's just count down from the top of the Amud. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 lines down from the top. B'chol Dar V'Dar. Chayav Adam Liros Es Atzmo, Ke'ilu Hu Atzmo, Ke'ilu Hu Yatza Mitzrayim. It's if he himself was liberated from Mitzrayim. He was an Eved, and he was liberated. Now, the Rambam, as you'll see quoted here in the note, has a different girsa. Instead of Chayav Adam Liros Es Atzmo, he should see himself, the Rambam says Laharos Es Atzmo. And again, this makes sense according to what we learned before, that the Pesach Matzu Morar and the Dalikosos and Aseba and Tibul B'charosos, all the above, are part of Sipur Yitzis Mitzrayim Alidei Maisa, which is the fulfillment of Laharos Atzma. Shenemar. Now the pasuk is talking about Bias Haaretz, when the people will cross the Jordan and come into Eretz Yisrael. And this pasuk is addressing the Jewish people throughout ad infinitum, until the end of time. And the word li means that he sees himself as if he himself left Mitzrayim. Now he adds here a comment of the Maram Chalva, one of the Rishonim. Sharei ilu lo gal HaKadosh Baruch Hu es avosenu harei anu ubanenu v'nei banenu ayinu avod adayim mishubanu lefaro b'Mitzrayim. So again, how could I think of myself as if I left Mitzrayim? The answer is because if not for Yetzias Mitzrayim, I would still be an Eved in Mitzrayim. How do we understand that? I mean, can anyone actually make that claim and attest to the fact that we would still be avodim to Paro? Maybe at some point we get a more friendly leader that would free us from Avdus. So this makes a lot more sense, I think, Lefi Anistaiti, in the context of Rav and what we discussed about Pidyon HaNefesh. That what Yetzias Mitzrayim created or forged in the nefesh of a Jew is Pidyon. So it's a spiritual salvation and freedom that allows us to be Avdei Hashem, because on a psychological or call it existential level, as Avodim in Mitzrayim, we were not able to accept upon ourselves Avdus Hashem. Now through Yetzias Mitzrayim, we become Avdei Hashem, and that will change, so to speak, the spiritual DNA of the Jewish nation for all time. We are B'nai Chorin in the sense that we became Avdei Hashem, and that is all a result of Yetzias Mitzrayim. Lefichach, and this we're familiar from the Haggadah. Let's just count that up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Right? 9 different languages here. Lahader, he identifies as lechabed. Kilus is lashon dibur. The Ritva apparently doesn't have lekalis, based on Tehillim. It's a lashon genai. And now he quotes a Mechilta. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 lines up from the bottom of the page. In note number Tesvav, Shehayum HaMitzrim Rodfim Achrei B'nei Yisrael Hayum Acharfim Umegadfim. So the Mitzrim would blaspheme against the Almighty. Aval Yisrael Romamu, but by contrast, the people of Israel would laud and praise V'shimchu chol minei shevach hakein tiknu laharbos v'lishonos sheva. How many are there? Teisha lishonos. Some say that the magic number should be 7. Keneged Zion Rikim. Okay, so he's going to have to take out 2. Maybe he'll take out Lekales, as we discussed before. Maybe he'll take out Lahadir. I don't know. But he says that even though there are only 7 Rakim, but there are 9 Galgalim. Tells you to look in Yesodei Torah, Perek Gimel Halacha Aleph. Let me just quickly look at this. Galgalim, Vehem Tisha Galgalim. The Rambam opens up the 3rd chapter of Yesodei Torah and he counts 9 Galgalim. I don't know if these are 9 planets. How many planets? Anybody know how many planets there are in the solar system? In our solar system? You can Google it. I don't know what Galgalim means. Right? Hotzionu mi avdus l'cherus. Well, first he says, L'misha sal avoseinu v'lanu es kol hanisim ha'elu. Okay. Kol hanisim ha'elu. Hotzionu mi avdus l'cherus mi yogan l'simcha me evel yom tov u'me'afelu li'or godol mishubad l'gu'ula. V'nomar lefanav Hallelujah. All right, this is where we'll stop for today. Make a note of it, Mirz Hashem, tomorrow. Now, I just want to mention there's a Haggadah, which I think I have somewhere. I got to find it. It's up in the attic probably, because we still didn't unpack from the move. Anyway, there's a Haggadah called Haggadah Mibeis Halevi. And there are pieces there in that Haggadah from the Brisker Rav. So I'd like to go through with you. Maybe I'll take a picture of it if I find it and send it to you by WhatsApp. A picture of an insight on this particular Mishnah that we just read. Me Avdus L'Cheres, me Shiba L'Gula, me Evel Yontif, and all that. There's a piece in the Brisker Rav. So I'll try to, Bli Neder, get that to you for tomorrow. Okay, then? So Bli Neder, in about 10 minutes, we'll learn Masechet Sanhedrin.